The underestimation. The morning sun cast long shadows across the lunar surface as Admiral Sarah Chen stood before the observation deck of Armstrong Base. 6 months had passed since the Zephyrian fleet had emerged from the void between stars, their sleek vessels materializing at the edge of Earth's solar system like silver daggers against the black of space. What had begun as humanity's greatest moment of discovery had slowly transformed into something far more ominous. Chen adjusted her uniform and checked her chronometer. In 30 minutes, she would face High Commander Vextar again, and this time, the stakes were higher than ever before. The initial contact had been promising enough. The Zephyrians appeared humanoid, though taller and more slender than humans, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer in certain light. Their technology was clearly centuries ahead of anything Earth had developed, yet they had approached with what seemed like diplomatic intentions. Captain Marcus Reed approached from behind, his heavy footsteps echoing in the sterile corridor. Reed had been Chen's tactical advisor for over a decade, and she could read the concern in his weathered face without him saying a word. "Admiral, the Zephyrian shuttle is requesting permission to dock," Reed reported, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken worries. "Granted," Chen replied, never taking her eyes off the alien mothership that hung in space like a monument to technological superiority. "And Marcus, make sure Dr. Vasquez has her latest reports ready. I have a feeling we're going to need them." The meeting chamber had been specially constructed for these diplomatic encounters. Large windows provided a clear view of both Earth and the Zephyrian fleet, while the room itself contained the latest in human technology. It was humanity's attempt to project strength, though Chen wondered if it might seem quaint to beings who could travel between stars. High Commander Vextar entered with his usual entourage of advisors and guards. The Zephyrian leader moved with fluid grace, his elongated limbs carrying him across the room with an almost ethereal quality. His large, dark eyes surveyed the room with what Chen had learned to recognize as barely concealed amusement. "Admiral Chen," Vextar spoke, his voice carrying the musical quality that all Zephyrian speech possessed. Their translation technology had proven remarkably effective, though Chen sometimes wondered what nuances were lost in the conversion. "I trust you have considered our previous discussions regarding your planet's military capabilities." Chen remained standing, a gesture that she knew the Zephyrians interpreted as either defiance or stupidity. In their culture, only equals remained standing in each other's presence. "Commander Vextar, we've reviewed your requests, and I'm afraid we cannot comply with your demands to decommission our defensive systems." A sound that might have been laughter emerged from Vextar's throat. Over the months, Chen had observed that Zephyrians found many human customs amusing, though their amusement often carried undertones of condescension. "Admiral, your defensive systems," Vextar gestured elegantly with one long-fingered hand. "We have studied your weapons technology extensively. Your reliance on chemical propellants and kinetic projectiles is, how you say, charming in its primitiveness." Dr. Elena Vasquez stepped forward from her position near the wall. The weapons engineer had insisted on attending this meeting, despite Chen's initial reservations. Vasquez was brilliant, but had little patience for diplomatic niceties. "Commander Vextar," Vasquez interjected, "while our weapons may seem primitive to your people, they have served humanity well for centuries." Vextar's dark eyes focused on the scientist with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. "Dr. Vasquez, is it not? Your reputation precedes you. Tell me, do you truly believe that weapons which fire metal projectiles could pose any threat to vessels protected by quantum phase barriers and regenerative hull matrices?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Chen watched as Vasquez's jaw tightened slightly, a sign that the engineer was choosing her words carefully. "Every weapon system has its applications, Commander," Vasquez replied diplomatically. "Versatility has always been one of humanity's strengths." This time, Vextar's laughter was unmistakable. The sound was musical but cold, and it was joined by similar sounds from his advisors. "Versatility," he repeated, as if the word itself was amusing. "Admiral, Yesterday, your Dr. Vasquez demonstrated what you consider your most advanced kinetic weapon, a projectile that travels at merely 3 times the speed of sound, delivering kinetic energy through primitive impact. Vextar moved to the observation window, his reflection ghost-like against the star field beyond. Our defensive barriers operate by analyzing incoming threats and adapting in real time. A weapon that announces its approach with chemical combustion and travels at such modest velocities is neutralized before it can travel half the distance to its target. Captain Reed stepped forward, his military bearing evident even in the diplomatic setting. And yet, Commander, you seem quite concerned about our military capabilities for weapons you consider obsolete. The observation struck home. Chen saw Vextar's advisors exchange glances, and the Zephyrian leader's amused expression flickered momentarily. Concerned, Vextar turned back to face the humans. Admiral, we are not concerned. We are being thorough. In our experience, newly contacted species often react unpredictably when faced with technological superiority. We simply wish to avoid unnecessary complications. Chen felt the conversation shifting into dangerous territory. Over the months, these diplomatic meetings had gradually transformed from cultural exchanges into something more resembling interrogations. The Zephyrians' requests had become increasingly demanding, and their tone had grown correspondingly condescending. "What exactly are you proposing, Commander?" Chen asked directly. Vextar moved away from the window, approaching the conference table with predatory smoothness. "Admiral, your species possesses remarkable creativity and determination. These are qualities that the Zephyrian collective values highly. We are prepared to offer Earth membership in our Confederation of Worlds." The offer sounded generous, but Chen had learned to listen for what wasn't being said. And what would membership entail? "Standard protocols," Vextar replied with casual ease. "Your military forces would be integrated into our defensive framework. Your industrial capacity would contribute to collective prosperity. Your people would benefit from advanced technology and expanded horizons." Dr. Vasquez spoke up again, her scientific mind cutting through the diplomatic language. "And in return, we surrender our autonomy and defensive capabilities." Vextar's dark eyes fixed on her, with an intensity that made the temperature in the room seem to drop. "Dr. Vasquez, autonomy is a luxury that primitive civilizations cannot afford when they encounter superior ones. History is replete with examples of what happens when the technologically advanced meet the technologically inferior." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Chen felt Reed tense beside her, and she knew that her tactical advisor was thinking the same thing she was. This was no longer a negotiation. It was an ultimatum disguised as diplomacy. "Commander," Chen said carefully, "Earth appreciates the Zephyrian collective's offer, but we need time to consider such a significant decision." "Time," Vextar repeated, and Chen heard something new in his voice: impatience. "Admiral, our generosity has limits. We have spent considerable resources on this diplomatic approach when other methods would have been more efficient." The mask was beginning to slip. Chen realized that the Zephyrians had been studying humanity not as potential partners, but as a species to be cataloged and controlled. Their superior attitude wasn't just cultural arrogance. It was the confidence of predators sizing up prey. "How much time?" Chen asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Vextar consulted a device that materialized in his palm with a gesture. 48 of your hours should be sufficient for your leaders to recognize the wisdom of cooperation. After that time, we will be forced to implement alternative integration protocols." The euphemism was chilling in its clinical detachment. Chen stood straighter, drawing on decades of military training to keep her voice steady. "We understand your position, Commander. You'll have our answer within your time frame." As the Zephyrian delegation prepared to leave, Vextar paused at the chamber's entrance. "Admiral, I do hope your leaders will choose wisely. Your species shows promise, but promise unfulfilled is merely potential wasted." After the aliens departed, Chen found herself alone with Reed and Vasquez. The silence stretched between them until Reed finally spoke. They're not planning to wait for an answer, are they? Chen shook her head slowly. No, Marcus. They're giving us time to prepare for the inevitable. She turned to Vasquez. Elena, I need to know everything about those weapons demonstrations we've been conducting. Every detail, every result, every theory you haven't shared. Vasquez's eyes lit up with an intensity that Chen had seen before when the engineer was working on a particularly challenging problem. Admiral, there are things about kinetic weapons that the Zephyrians don't understand. They've advanced so far beyond physical projectiles that they've forgotten some basic principles, such as adaptability, Vasquez replied, echoing her earlier comment. Their barriers are sophisticated, but they're designed to counter energy weapons and high-velocity projectiles. They analyze and adapt, but they expect certain parameters. Chen felt a spark of hope. Go on. What if we don't give them what they expect? Vasquez asked. What if we use their assumptions against them? Reed frowned. You're talking about going up against energy shields and hull plating that can regenerate damage faster than we can inflict it. Maybe, Vasquez said with a growing smile. But only if we fight them the way they expect us to fight. Chen looked out at the Zephyrian fleet, their ships gleaming like jewels against the star field. Humanity had always been underestimated, had always found ways to overcome superior force through ingenuity and determination. Perhaps it was time to remind the galaxy why humans had earned their place among the stars, through struggle rather than gifts. Elena, I want you to gather every weapons engineer, every tactical specialist, every creative mind we have. Chen ordered. 48 hours to prepare for a war we're not supposed to be able to win. As her team dispersed to begin preparations, Chen remained at the observation window. The Zephyrians thought they understood humanity, thought they had measured the extent of human capability, and found it wanting. They had made the same mistake that others had made throughout history. They had confused technological superiority with inevitable victory. In 48 hours, Chen thought, they would learn why that was a dangerous assumption to make about the human species. The Reckoning. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the command center of Luna Base as the countdown timer displayed 18 hours and 37 minutes. Around her, the most brilliant minds Earth had ever assembled worked with desperate intensity, their fingers dancing across holographic displays and their voices creating a symphony of controlled urgency. Dr. Elena Vasquez approached, her hair disheveled from 26 straight hours of work, but her eyes bright with excitement. Admiral, we've run the simulations 17 times. The theoretical framework is sound, but we won't know until we test it under combat conditions. Chen finished. She had heard variations of this conversation from a dozen different specialists over the past day. Humanity was about to stake its future on theories and educated guesses. Captain Marcus Reed materialized beside them, his expression grim. Long-range sensors are picking up movement from the Zephyrian fleet. 3 of their escort vessels have broken formation and are moving toward Earth orbit. Chen nodded. She had expected this. Vextar was not the type to wait for deadlines when he could apply pressure instead. How long until they reach our outer defensive perimeter? 6 hours at their current speed, Reed replied. Admiral, our orbital platforms are automated, but if they're destroyed, they won't be, Chen said with more confidence than she felt. At least, not in the way the Zephyrians expect. The past 48 hours had transformed Earth's military doctrine in ways that would have seemed impossible under normal circumstances. Traditional command structures had given way to collaborative innovation as scientists, engineers, and tactical specialists worked together to reimagine warfare itself. Dr. Vasquez pulled up a holographic display showing a cross-section of a Zephyrian vessel. Their quantum phase barriers operate by analyzing incoming threats and generating counter-harmonics. The system is incredibly sophisticated, but it has one critical limitation. It expects consistency, Reed said, demonstrating that he had been paying attention to the technical briefings. Exactly, Vasquez confirmed. Their barriers can adapt to energy weapons because energy follows predictable patterns. Even their countermeasures for kinetic weapons assume projectiles will maintain consistent velocity, trajectory, and mass. Chen studied the display, seeing the fruits of humanity's desperate innovation. "Show me the modifications." The hologram shifted, displaying what appeared to be a standard kinetic projectile, but Chen could see immediately that appearances were deceiving. "We call them adaptive rounds," Vasquez explained. "Each projectile contains microthrusters that can alter trajectory mid-flight. The warhead is modular, capable of separating into multiple components or reconfiguring its mass distribution. The Zephyrian barriers will analyze the initial projectile," Reed added, "but when it suddenly becomes 3 different objects with completely different flight characteristics, the adaptation cycle has to restart." Chen finished, beginning to understand the elegance of the solution. And in that restart window, the projectiles reached their target, Vasquez confirmed. But that's just the beginning. The real innovation is in the delivery system. A new display materialized, showing what looked like a traditional Earth warship, but with modifications that made Chen's breath catch. "We've retrofitted every vessel in the fleet with what we're calling swarm launchers. Instead of firing single projectiles, each launcher can deploy thousands of adaptive rounds simultaneously, each following a different flight path and programmed with different behavior patterns." Reed gestured to another section of the display. "The Zephyrians have never encountered anything like this because they abandoned physical projectiles centuries ago. Their tactical databases have no reference point for this kind of attack pattern." Chen felt a familiar sensation, the same mixture of fear and exhilaration she had experienced before every major battle of her career. Humanity was about to gamble everything on its ability to be unpredictable. "Admiral," came a voice from across the command center. Lieutenant Commander Torres approached with a communication tablet. "Priority message from the Zephyrian flagship." Chen accepted the tablet, unsurprised to see Vextar's elongated features on the screen. The alien commander appeared relaxed, almost bored. "Admiral Chen." Vextar's musical voice carried its usual note of condescension. "I trust you have used your time wisely to consider our generous offer." "Commander Vextar," Chen replied, allowing a slight smile to play across her lips. "We have indeed used our time wisely." Earth's answer is no. For the first time in their interactions, Chen saw genuine surprise flicker across the alien's features. "Admiral, I fear you have misunderstood the nature of our discussion. This was not a negotiation." "No," Chen agreed. "It wasn't. It was a test. And you've learned something important about humanity that your databases apparently missed." Vextar's dark eyes narrowed. "And what lesson do you believe we have learned?" "That we don't surrender," Chen said simply. "Not to superior technology, not to superior numbers, and certainly not to species who mistake arrogance for strength." The communication display flickered, and Chen could see other Zephyrians moving behind Vextar, their body language suggesting sudden activity. "Admiral." Vextar's voice had lost its musical quality, becoming flat and cold. "You are forcing us to demonstrate why peaceful integration would have been preferable to the alternative." "Commander," Chen replied, "you're about to discover why underestimating humanity has historically been a fatal mistake." The transmission ended, and immediately the command center exploded into controlled chaos. Display screens lit up with tactical information as sensors detected the Zephyrian fleet moving into attack formation. "All stations, this is Admiral Chen," she announced over the fleet communication system. "Operation Last Laugh is now active. All vessels are to implement adaptive engagement protocols. Remember, the element of surprise only works once, so make it count." The first Zephyrian attack came exactly as Earth's analysts had predicted. Brilliant beams of coherent energy lanced out from the alien vessels, striking Earth's orbital defense platforms with devastating accuracy. The platform's conventional shields held for mere seconds before being overwhelmed by the sheer power of the Zephyrian weapons. But as the energy beams dissipated, the defense platforms remained intact. What the Zephyrians had destroyed were holographic projections, carefully positioned to mask the platform's true locations. Phase 1 complete, reported Torres. Enemy targeting systems are locked onto false positions. Initiate Phase 2, Chen ordered. Across Earth's fleet, thousands of launch tubes opened simultaneously. What emerged wasn't the orderly volley of projectiles that the Zephyrians expected, but a chaotic swarm of adaptive rounds, each following seemingly random trajectories. On the main display, Chen watched as the Zephyrian barriers activated, their quantum phase technology analyzing the incoming projectiles and generating appropriate countermeasures. For a moment, it appeared that the alien defenses would hold. Then the first adaptive round reached its pre-programmed distance and split into 7 separate projectiles, each with different mass and velocity characteristics. The Zephyrian barrier, still calibrated for the original projectile, failed to adapt quickly enough. The first kinetic impact against a Zephyrian hull sent shockwaves through both fleets. The alien vessel's regenerative armor began working to repair the damage. But before it could complete the process, 17 more impacts struck different sections of the ship. Their armor can regenerate, Dr. Vasquez observed from her position at the tactical station, but not fast enough to counter sustained bombardment from multiple vectors. Across the battle space, the same scenario was playing out on dozens of Zephyrian vessels. Their sophisticated defenses, designed to counter predictable threats, were struggling to adapt to humanity's chaotic approach to warfare. But the aliens were not helpless. As their initial shock wore off, Zephyrian commanders began implementing countermeasures. Their energy weapons, more precise than anything humanity had developed, began tracking and destroying individual projectiles with increasing accuracy. "They're adapting," Reed reported grimly. "Projectile hit rate is dropping rapidly." Chen had expected this. Phase 3. All vessels implement pattern shift protocols. Suddenly, the human fleet's attack pattern changed completely. The swarm launcher volleys ceased, replaced by precision strikes from modified railguns that fired projectiles with constantly shifting characteristics. Each round was unique, programmed with different flight behaviors, and designed to force the Zephyrian adaptive systems to recalibrate continuously. The battle that followed would be studied by military historians for generations. It was a clash between technological superiority and tactical innovation, between predictable efficiency and chaotic creativity. The Zephyrian fleet, despite its advanced weapons and defenses, found itself struggling against an enemy that refused to fight according to established parameters. Every time their adaptive systems found a counter to one human tactic, Earth's forces would shift to something completely different. As the hours passed, the tide of battle gradually shifted. Zephyrian vessels, their regenerative armor overwhelmed by constant bombardment from unpredictable angles, began to show serious damage. More importantly, their formation discipline began to break down as individual commanders struggled to counter tactics they had never encountered. The turning point came when Captain Reed implemented what would later be known as the Torres Gambit, 3 Earth destroyers. Their hulls, scared by Zephyrian energy weapons, suddenly accelerated directly toward the alien flagship. As Zephyrian gunners focused on these apparent suicide runs, the destroyers launched every adaptive round in their magazines simultaneously. Over 15,000 projectiles, each programmed with unique flight characteristics, converged on Vextar's flagship from multiple directions. The ship's quantum phase barriers, overwhelmed by the sheer variety of threats, began cycling through countermeasures so rapidly that they created cascade failures in the defensive grid. The first kinetic impacts against the flagship sent shockwaves through the Zephyrian fleet. As their command ship began listing, its regenerative armor struggling to keep pace with the damage, something unprecedented happened. Vextar's voice crackled across all communication channels, his musical tone replaced by something approaching panic. "Ceasefire. We request parley." Admiral Chen, standing in her battle-scarred command center, felt a moment of profound satisfaction. Around her, her crew worked to coordinate the fleet's response, but she could see the mixture of exhaustion and pride on their faces. "All vessels, cease fire," Chen ordered. "Maintain targeting solutions but hold positions." The communication from Vextar's flagship showed the Zephyrian commander in an environment Chen had never seen before. Sparks flew from damaged systems behind him, and his usual composed demeanor had been replaced by something approaching respect. "Admiral Chen," Vextar said, his voice carrying none of its previous condescension. "It appears we have underestimated your species' capabilities." "Commander," Chen replied, allowing herself a slight smile. "That seems to be a common mistake when dealing with humanity." The aftermath of the battle would reshape interstellar politics for decades to come. The Zephyrian collective, faced with evidence that their technological superiority was not absolute, was forced to reconsider their approach to newly contacted species. But in that moment, as Earth's battered fleet held the field against an enemy that had considered them primitives, Admiral Sarah Chen felt something that she would carry with her for the rest of her life. It was the satisfaction of proving that the human spirit, creativity, and determination could overcome any technological advantage. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson about humanity that day. When humans were underestimated, when they were dismissed as primitive or obsolete, they had a remarkable tendency to prove their critics wrong in the most decisive way possible. And sometimes, Chen reflected as she watched the Zephyrian fleet begin its retreat, the last laugh really was the best laugh of all.